Welcome to the Data Room, where we share best practices and actionable tips on being a data-driven company, or as we call it, data first. If you're a B2B revenue leader looking to scale your growth stage business, come and join experienced CEO and tech founder Scott Stouffer in the Data Room. And welcome back to the Data Room. We have a special episode today featuring Scott Stouffer, CEO and co-founder of scaleMatters. I actually wanted to share a clip from a webinar that Scott presented at earlier this year because I think it's particularly relevant. As RevOps leaders are moving into the new year, I'm talking about CRM cleanup time. It's often seen as a necessary chore for someone in a company to do kind of a data audit and cleanup of duplicate fields, duplicate information, missing information, all that good stuff. But what if I told you that you're just kicking the can down the road with these data cleanups? Take a listen as Scott dives into the reasons why occasional CRM data cleanups are often non-productive and difficult to manage.
The last thing we want to talk about is data integrity. This doesn't get enough screen time, in our opinion. Everybody complains, everybody literally that we go into, and we're talking again, growth stage tech companies, complains about the state of their data in the sales and marketing environment. And so often what we see people do is, oh, we're going to go through this big project to do a data cleanup. And they do that, sometimes spend $1 million or more, right? Because they go get these expensive Salesforce consultants or whatever. And then 6 months later, the data's garbage again. These one-time fixes don't generally work as a good strategy. They don't really address why did the data become so bad to begin with. They spend a lot of time cleaning records, but they don't necessarily go and say, okay, since one of the reasons the data got so bad is because of how the salespeople interact with the CRM, these cleanups often don't include this substantial training program to change the behaviors of the salespeople. We often see kind of lack of cultural commitment to being data first, which requires you to say the data integrity is important. It cannot take a second seat to anything. And then the last thing that causes these data cleanups to often fail is, too many of us, we hire a new VP of sales, we hire a new VP of marketing, and we let them just come in and change the data set. And so you might have gone through this big cleanup, and new person comes in and says, okay, I don't want to use Pardot, I don't want to use Marketo, and we're going to change this, and I want to use these things. And there isn't enough time spent understanding, well, what have we built here from a data fabric? And if you want to make these changes, how are they going to impact that? And so, what we're trying to encourage companies to do is to view the data model as something that's sacred. And there needs to be a damn good reason to change it. And there needs to be, a control group that it's like any kind of QA that can sort of evaluate these changes and understand what's the impact on compatibility of historical data going to be, et cetera. So generally, without having this sort of continuous view of the data integrity and doing these one-off cleanups, they help, but they help temporarily. They're often very expensive. So one of the things we like to encourage companies to do, we call them data integrity protocols. So it's effectively implement mechanisms that help to drive up the integrity of the data. And there's kind of two categories of these things. The first one is preventative mechanisms. How do we stop fields from being empty to begin with? Or how do we stop bad data from getting into fields to begin with? And the first thing is try to remove the human need, the requirement for humans to fill stuff out. There is an awful lot of stuff that can be inferred in the overall lead to order process. It could be dates, it could be conversion rates or whatever. And you don't, it could be a disposition of a meeting or of a call. You don't necessarily need a person to mark that down if you can infer it. We do a lot of work in Salesforce environments, and Salesforce is particularly elegant with its flows, its automation capability. And you can build these flows to basically infer and auto-populate a lot of the information that you need. Another capability around auto-populating is that voice of prospect. Stop relying on the salespeople to make a note of who we're competing with, or even worse, force them to pick from a drop-down list of who we're competing with. Use the conversation intelligence and get it directly out of the horse's mouth of the prospect and auto-populate that information. Other things you can do, protocol-wise or mechanism-wise, simplifies the user interface. I don't know how many places we go into. The salesperson's view for a contact or a lead or a record, it's got so many fields and sections in it that they never even look at. And so it's just overwhelming. Narrow it down to what's important, what's really important for them, that particular user role, to be able to know, to be able to enhance or enrich, and to be able to move on. The next thing is this concept of change intelligence. I touched on that briefly, but we highly encourage companies, again, to view the data and the data model and the data integrity as this thing that you have to protect at all costs. And part of that is implementing cultural mechanisms to make sure that if there are going to be changes made, that those are widely understood and that someone has evaluated the impact of those changes so that it doesn't break old data or render historical data useless. And then the last thing is the model itself should help to prevent some of this stuff. So we talked, while we were talking about model, about things like dealing with this multi-cycle attribution, which is, somebody comes in, this year in May, it doesn't work out. They come back 2 years later and end up buying from you. Those are two different sales cycles. And the model has to account for it that way so that you don't end up with bastardized data. Same thing with record reassignment, right? Salespeople are constantly coming and going or moving from one region to a next. And we see so many companies, just simply change the owner of the record, and then you lose any visibility of the prior owner. So we recommend in our models that we suggest to people that you have this whole concept of current owners, prior owners, when did the record owner date change, all that kind of stuff, so that it actually, in the data model, it basically builds in the integrity of the data from an analytical perspective. And then the last thing, besides all these preventative things you can do to ensure that the data integrity persists, is have corrective mechanisms. The most rudimentary one is simply clean your room dashboards, which are effectively dashboards for each of the salespeople, for the sales manager, that highlight records and salespeople or SDRs that own those records that have problems with them. And then you have to culturally make it part of the once a week sales meeting. We call them clean your room dashboards. Other people call them wall of shame, right? The whole idea is you have to talk about it, you have to expose it and hold people accountable for the data integrity. Other things you can do are all of these daily data checks. We often, when we're involved with companies, build these daily data check dashboards that we use internally. So we're constantly looking for data anomalies that creep up, and then we're correcting them in real time. So all of these things together help you to effectively have this persistent data integrity, which is so critically important if you want to be data first and be able to start analyzing this stuff.
Interesting, right? I think it's something to consider. If you're doing a periodic data cleanup, are you just doing the same data cleanup work every time? Would it be a better use of your time to reevaluate how your CRM is set up so you don't have to do the same work on a regular basis? If that's something that's piquing your interest, check out scaleMatters.com/assessment. We're offering a complimentary RevOps data maturity assessment for listeners of this podcast, so you can get a better handle on what you should change in your CRM to avoid bad data input in the first place. That's scalematters.com/assessment. Check it out. And thanks for joining us in the data room. We'll see you next time.